Hello YouTube. I hope you all are doing well on this Sunday afternoon. I know it's been a little while since I've spoken on anything. I've been going through a few things myself, but I'm staying positive. But something's come to my attention that I thought you all might want to hear. Something I needed to hear. But I hope you're all doing well and doing good. Stay strong, stay positive. We all want to get through this mess. George Junius Stinney Jr. Or does anyone know of the short story of George Stinney? I say short because he had a short life. Well, I didn't know much either until Cheryl brought it to my attention and asked me, in her own little way, to read up on him. I did. What I read thoroughly disgusted me. This is a little unknown or well not publicized fact of dark America, our America. George Stinney Jr. was an African-American child, and I mean a child, who was convicted of supposedly murdering two white girls ages 7 and 11 in his hometown of Aluhu, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this right, Al-Ohu, South Carolina. The year was 1944 in the Deep South. George was 14 years old at the time. He was executed or murdered by the electric chair on June 16, 1944. George Stinney Jr. is the youngest American to be sentenced to death and executed. The incident was March 1944. On March 24th or the 25th, the bodies of two young white girls, Betty June Beneker, age 11, and Mary Emma Thames, age 7, were discovered in Alculu, South Carolina. The girls had gone missing the day prior and never returned home the previous night. The older girl had died from blunt force trauma. Her skull had been fractured. Case background. Now, George Jr. lived in Alculu, Clarendon County, South Carolina, with his father, George Stinney Sr., his mother, Alma, his two brothers, John 17 and Charles 12, and his two sisters, Catherine 10 and Alma 7, named after her mother. Now, George Stinney Sr. worked at the town sawmill, and the family lived in company housing. The town was a small working-class mill town where white and black neighborhoods were separated by railroad tracks. Like most southern towns of the time, everything was segregated, and white and black residents had limited interactions with each other. The bodies of the two white girls were found in a ditch on the black side of town. The girls were found after a search of the nearby areas. George Stinney Sr., he took part in the search himself, trying to find the girls. The girls were last seen riding their bicycles, looking for flowers. When they passed the Stinney's property, they asked young George and his sister Alma if they knew where to find maypops. That's a local flower which are actually passion flowers. Accordingly to George Jr.'s sister, Alma, George was with her the whole time after police established the murders. The medical examiner reported the wounds on the girl's body were inflicted with a blunt force object with a round head, possibly a hammer. Both of their skulls had been punctured. There was no evidence of sexual assault on the younger girl. but the genitalia of the older girl was bruised. I mention these things because a very young black child was arrested for this crime, just because he was seen talking with his sister. Later on, George Stinney Jr. and his older brother are arrested on suspicion of killing the girls. George's older brother gets released by the police, but George is held. George was not allowed to see his parents until after his trial and conviction, which was 81 days later. According to a handwritten statement, the arresting officer, H.S. Newman, a Clarendon County deputy, this officer claimed George made a confession and told him, Officer Newman, where to find this piece of iron, which was about 15 inches in length, which was supposed to have been the murder weapon. He said George supposedly put it in a ditch 6 feet from the girls' bicycles. Now, no confession statement by George Stinney is ever known to exist. They all took the word of this one deputy, this white deputy. The 14-year-old said the officers starved him and bribed him with food to confess to something he did not do. After the arrest of George, his father, George Stinney Sr., was fired from his job at the local sawmill. Plus, the family had to immediately vacate their company housing, so they became homeless. The family feared for their safety. The family did not see George until his trial, which, like I said, was 81 days later. George had to be detained in another jail in Columbia, South Carolina, due to the risk of lynching. Now, George, when he was first arrested, he was questioned alone, without his parents or an attorney, a 14-year-old child now. The trial, if you could call it that, took all of 1 day. George's court-appointed lawyer was a tax commissioner who was campaigning for election to some local office at the time. So his mind wasn't even on George. He was trying to get reelected, and he was a tax commissioner at that. His counsel, if you could call him that, did not challenge the 3 white police officers who claimed George confessed to the 2 murders, despite being the only evidence against him. No paperwork was found, just their words. The all-white jury, with no blacks even allowed in the courtroom. The trial presentation lasted just 2.5 hours. And it took the all-white jury less than 10 minutes to convict George and find him guilty. The judge, Philip H. Stoll, sentenced George to death by electrocution. No appeal was filed by his defense attorney. The family appealed for some type of mercy or clemency for their son. They went to churches, the NAACP. They all appealed to the governor at the time. But others at the time said, let the execution proceed. They did not care about it. So in the end, there was no clemency, no mercy for this young child. So on June 16th, 1944, at about 7:25 p.m., George, standing no more than 5 feet 1 inch, weighing only about 90 pounds, 3 officers escorted him to the electrocution room. And because George was so short, they had to place a Bible in his seat like a booster seat so they could shackle him to the chair. George's father was allowed to approach his son. An officer asked George if he had any last words. George slowly shook his head as tears fell from his eyes and a hood was placed over his head. The child could only softly whimper and sob as they finished restraining him in that chair. When the electricity hit him, the mask covering his face slipped off, revealing George's burned scalp, tears streaming down his face, saliva dripping from his mouth. His teeth were smoking, and he had one eye missing.
Oh my goodness.
Like I said, this is a story which disgusted me and saddened and angered me. That's why America today is going through this transformation, because things must change and true justice must be achieved. There's more to this story, but time won't allow me to go on. But check it out for yourselves. George Junius Stinney Jr., born October the 21st, 1929, murdered June 16th, 1944. There have been several films and books about the case that point to Stinney's innocence throughout. Now, it took 70 years for him to be cleared, and he wasn't completely exonerated. But mainly, they know this young man was innocent of the crimes that he was accused of. Thank you. Check him out, George Stinney Jr. Bye now. And by the way, I got a picture of him. You want to hold on a minute of how this young child looked.
Okay.
Go fatness.
Okay.
This is a picture of young George Stinney Jr., his mugshots. You can see how young he is and how afraid he is. He was 14 years old when this picture was taken. His profile and then the frontal picture of him. Just a child, our child, and never ever had a chance to grow up and live a full life. Thank you for hearing the story, and I'll talk with you later. Take care now.